You don't belong here. Brooke's voice dripped with disdain as she leaned back in her first-class seat, eyes scanning Jasmine's every move. Jasmine, dressed in a sleek black dress that shimmered under the dim lighting of the high-end lounge, approached the gate, her gaze steady and calm. Brooke's eyes narrowed. Do you even know where you're at? This is a place for people like me, not people like you. The crowd fell silent as Jasmine paused in front of her, taking in Brooke's arrogance, her fingers lightly gripping the strap of her bag. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't react. She just stood there, perfectly still, as if the words meant nothing. Brooke smiled, leaning back further in her plush seat, her laughter echoing slightly as she motioned toward the flight attendant. Hey, can you get security over here? We have a situation. The attendant hesitated, but quickly turned, nodding as she walked away. Jasmine's phone buzzed in her pocket, but she didn't take it out. Instead, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. In less than a minute, 2 security guards appeared, their eyes scanning Jasmine's face with a mixture of suspicion and duty. Ma'am, we need you to step aside, one of them said, his tone polite but firm. Brooke sat up straighter, eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Jasmine didn't speak for a long moment, then her lips parted just enough to utter 3 words. I'm not moving. The guards hesitated. A few passengers turned their heads, sensing the tension, as Brooke started narrating her version of the story, loud enough for everyone to hear. I've been flying first class for years. I know the kind of people who belong here, and trust me, she doesn't. I want her out of my seat. The flight attendants exchanged glances, looking at Jasmine, then back at Brooke. They seemed uncertain, but it was clear who was commanding the moment. Jasmine could feel the heat of the eyes on her, but she remained still, her expression calm, unwavering. Then, Brooke's smug expression faltered just slightly when she noticed Jasmine wasn't backing down. The guards seemed uncertain now, glancing between Brooke and Jasmine. They expected a fight, but Jasmine wasn't giving them one. She was just waiting. Brooke finally broke the silence, snapping at the attendants. Well, do something. I don't have time for this nonsense. The lead flight attendant shifted uncomfortably but then spoke. We need to verify your boarding passes. Ma'am, could you please step aside while we do that? Brooke shook her head dismissively. This is ridiculous, she muttered. I'll have my husband call. He practically owns the airline. But just as she started dialing, Jasmine pulled out her phone, her eyes never leaving Brooke's. She tapped a few keys and then looked up with a cool smile. I just confirmed, your husband's company contract with mine is officially canceled, Jasmine said, her voice cutting through the tension. For a moment, it felt as if time had frozen. Brooke's phone slipped from her hands, her face draining of color as she fumbled to regain control. What? She gasped, her voice suddenly small. Jasmine didn't move an inch, but the power in her words hit harder than any action could have. I own the company, Jasmine added, the words landing with finality. Brooke's expression went from confusion to panic as the reality of the situation sank in. Her world, built on privilege and connections, was beginning to crumble right in front of her. You can't, Brooke stammered, but Jasmine was already turning, her back straight as she walked away. The lounge was silent, every eye now on Brooke as she tried, and failed, to piece together what just happened. The guards stood still, unsure of what to do next. The entire event had shifted in a single moment, and Jasmine was walking away, her victory not just a matter of privilege, but power. As she disappeared into the crowd, Brooke was left frozen, staring at her phone, waiting for the storm that was about to hit her. What just happened? Who exactly was Jasmine? The ripple effect of this moment was only just beginning. As Jasmine walked away, the weight of what had just happened lingered in the air like a storm waiting to break. The whispers started slowly, like a ripple across a pond, but soon the entire lounge was buzzing with curiosity. Brooke stood frozen, her phone still clutched in her trembling hand, her thoughts racing to process what had just transpired. A few passengers exchanged looks, clearly shocked by the exchange, but none dared speak out. Jasmine, on the other hand, moved with the same poise and confidence as she had when she entered. The cool air of the high-end lounge felt more oppressive now, the tension thick. Enough to cut with a knife. As Jasmine passed through the crowd, she could hear snippets of conversations, but she didn't let it faze her. She had her mind set on the next step. She wasn't just going to walk away from this. She had a plan. Meanwhile, Brooke was still reeling. She had assumed her wealth and status would be enough to silence any challenge. But what had just happened shattered that illusion. "I own the company," Jasmine had said. The words echoed in her mind, drowning out the hum of the crowd. She had been so sure of her place in the world, but Jasmine had taken it all away in an instant. Brooke's phone buzzed again, this time with a message from her husband. She glanced down at the screen and felt a chill run down her spine. The message was simple. "What's happening?" Brooke's fingers shook as she typed a response, her mind still clouded by the shock. She was supposed to be in control, but the reality of the situation was rapidly slipping through her fingers. Jasmine didn't look back. She had seen the panic in Brooke's eyes and knew exactly what was coming next. The influence that Brooke had relied on for so long was crumbling, and now it was Jasmine's turn to take control. She stepped out of the lounge and into the terminal, her steps steady and confident. The world around her felt different now, as if everything had shifted in a moment. She had never been one to brag about her success, but something about the way Brooke had tried to humiliate her had stirred a fire inside her. This wasn't just about proving a point. It was about showing that power could be wielded with grace, not just brute force. As Jasmine walked toward her gate, she couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. This wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. She had a long way to go before she could truly claim victory, but today, she had won the first battle. Meanwhile, back in the lounge, Brooke had finally gathered herself enough to stand. Her phone buzzed again, and this time, the message from her husband was clear. "What's going on?" Brooke quickly typed a reply, her fingers still trembling. "She's gone. She's ruining everything. I don't know who she is, but she's going to cost us everything." As the message sent, Brooke's eyes darted nervously toward the crowd. She could feel their eyes on her, could sense their judgment. But there was nothing she could do to undo what had already happened. Jasmine had already walked out of her life, and Brooke knew, deep down, that things would never be the same again. As Jasmine made her way through the terminal, the weight of the moment began to settle in. She had never intended to make a scene, but Brooke's actions had left her no choice. The energy around her felt different now, more charged, as if the room itself was holding its breath. She wasn't just walking away from an argument. She was walking away from a moment that would change everything. She had heard the whispers, felt the eyes on her as she passed. There was something about the way Brooke had tried to dismiss her that had pushed Jasmine to act. She wasn't used to this kind of confrontation, but something inside her had snapped. She had worked too hard to get where she was, and now it felt like everything was falling into place. Brooke had underestimated her, thinking she was just another woman in a fancy dress with no real power. But Jasmine wasn't like the others. She had built an empire, one that was growing every day. She had the connections, the influence, and the business savvy to make decisions that could change the course of anyone's life. The plane was boarding now, and Jasmine made her way to the gate. She knew that she would need to stay focused, but the thrill of what had just happened kept her pulse racing. As she took her seat, the cabin felt strangely quiet. There was no more tension, no more eyes on her. She was simply another passenger now. But that wouldn't last. She had made a move, and now it was Brooke's turn to feel the consequences. Meanwhile, back in the lounge, Brooke was still reeling from the shock of what had just happened. Her phone buzzed once again, but this time, she hesitated before checking it. The message from her husband was blunt. "What the hell is going on?" Brooke's heart raced as she quickly typed back. She owns the company. She's ruined everything. She looked around, but no one was paying attention to her anymore. The shame was almost unbearable. The crowd had shifted from murmuring to quietly watching, but no one was talking to her. They had all seen her lose control, and there was no coming back from that. Brooke quickly stood up and grabbed her purse, her hands trembling as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. She had to figure out what to do next. She couldn't afford to let this moment define her, but the damage had already been done. She could feel the weight of Jasmine's words hanging in the air. "I own the company." Those words were like a final blow, cutting through her armor and leaving her exposed. She had been so sure of herself, so certain that her money and connections would always keep her safe. But Jasmine had shown her the truth. Power wasn't something you could buy. Power was something you earned. Brooke turned and headed for the exit, but as she walked, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just been a part of something much bigger than herself. She had underestimated Jasmine in the worst possible way, and now she would have to live with the consequences. Jasmine, on the other hand, was sitting calmly on the plane, her thoughts drifting between the events that had just transpired and the opportunities that lay ahead. She had made a statement, and she knew that it wouldn't be long before Brooke realized just how deep Jasmine's influence really went. The world had just shifted in her favor. Now it was time to make sure everyone else knew it too. The flight had barely taken off when Jasmine's phone buzzed. She looked down at the screen, knowing exactly who it was before she even unlocked it. What the hell just happened? Her husband's message stared back at her. She felt a small smile tug at the corner of her lips. She wasn't sure why, but she couldn't help it. The sense of control she had gained over the past hour was still fresh, still powerful. It had been a simple exchange, yet everything had shifted. Jasmine quickly typed a response, her fingers moving confidently over the keys. "I handled it. It's over now." She set the phone down, knowing there was more to come. But for now, she could enjoy the moment. Back at the airport, Brooke had finally left the lounge, her mind racing. She had no idea what Jasmine had done, what kind of power she had that could undo everything Brooke had worked for. Her husband's calls and messages kept flooding in, each one more urgent than the last. Brooke walked faster, her heels clicking against the polished floor, her thoughts a blur. She had to find a way to fix this, to regain control. She was no longer just embarrassed. She was desperate. At the same time, Jasmine's calmness seemed to reach new heights. She leaned back in her seat, her eyes closing for a moment as the plane soared into the sky. She had handled the confrontation with Brooke with grace, but now she was ready to shift her focus to the next steps. She could already see the impact of her actions. Brooke's world was crumbling, and Jasmine was in the perfect position to step in and take charge. Jasmine didn't need to gloat, didn't need to flaunt her power. She knew what she had, and that was all that mattered. The flight was smooth, and she spent the next couple of hours thinking about her next move. She didn't want to just stop at this small victory. Jasmine had bigger plans, ones that would solidify her position even further. But for now, she needed to take a breath and regroup. As she reached her destination, her phone buzzed once more. This time, it was a text from her assistant. "The deal is done. They've confirmed the terms." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat, but she remained composed. Everything was falling into place, just as she had known it would. Meanwhile, back at the airport, Brooke had finally reached the parking lot. She got into her car, gripping the wheel with white knuckles, trying to steady her breathing. She had been humiliated, and there was no denying it. But it wasn't over. She wasn't going to let one setback take her down. She would find a way to fight back. Her mind raced as she thought about what to do next, who she could call, what connections she could leverage to fix the damage. But no matter how hard she tried to push the thoughts of Jasmine out of her mind, the truth kept creeping back in. Jasmine had outplayed her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Jasmine's victory wasn't just a fluke. It was a sign of something much bigger. She would have to watch her back from here on out. Jasmine was no longer just a woman in the shadows. She was a force to be reckoned with. Jasmine stood in front of the large glass windows of her hotel suite, overlooking the bustling city below. The hum of the streets, the distant chatter, the occasional honking of cars, all seemed far away from the quiet confidence she felt inside. She could still hear the tension of the encounter at the airport echoing in her mind, but she had long since learned to control her emotions. It was a gift, one she had honed over the years, not just in business but in life. She had faced many challenges, but none quite like Brooke. The feeling of watching someone so sure of their power crumble under the weight of their own arrogance was more satisfying than she had expected. Jasmine let out a slow breath and turned from the window. Her assistant's voice crackled through the speaker on her phone, pulling her back to reality. The papers are ready to sign. The merger is happening today. Jasmine smiled, her eyes narrowing with purpose. Perfect. Let's do it. As she placed the phone down, she couldn't help but think back to Brooke, still sitting in that airport, probably frantically trying to fix everything. The humiliation was fresh, and yet Jasmine knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Her victory over Brooke was symbolic, but her real success lay in what was about to unfold. She wasn't just taking control of a moment. She was positioning herself for something bigger. Meanwhile, Brooke was sitting in her car, still trying to get a grip on the chaos of the past few hours. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She could feel the sting of embarrassment seeping deeper into her chest. How could this have happened? She had built her life on controlling situations, on knowing exactly what to say and do to manipulate outcomes in her favor. But Jasmine had shattered that illusion in an instant. Brooke reached for her phone again, hoping for something, anything, to restore her confidence. But this time, the messages were different. Her lawyer's response was blunt. We've reviewed the situation. The deal is off. You need to fix this. Immediately, Brooke felt a wave of panic surge through her. This wasn't just about her pride anymore. This was about her career, her future. She needed to act quickly. As the city lights flickered through her rearview mirror, she gripped the phone tighter. I can fix this, she whispered to herself. I always fix things. But deep down, she knew it wasn't going to be that easy. Jasmine was no ordinary adversary, and the stakes had just been raised higher than she could have imagined. She had underestimated Jasmine, and now she would have to pay the price. Back in Jasmine's suite, everything was coming together. The deals, the contracts, the power, everything was finally in her grasp. The hard work had paid off. She was no longer just a player in the game. She had become the one everyone would have to reckon with. And as she looked at her phone once more, a final message came through, this time from one of her partners. Everything is set. We're moving forward with the new deal. It's time. Jasmine's lips curled into a satisfied smile. She was exactly where she needed to be. Brooke had no idea what was coming next, but Jasmine was ready. The game had changed, and she had all the pieces in her control. Jasmine sat back in the leather chair of her office, her mind still buzzing from the events that had unfolded. The phone call had gone exactly as she had expected. The deal was sealed, the contract signed, and now the power was firmly in her hands. She could hear the faint hum of the city outside her window, but inside, everything was calm. For the first time in a long while, Jasmine felt truly at peace. She had done it. She had outsmarted them all. Brooke's world was collapsing, and Jasmine knew it. The emails had started to roll in, confirming everything was on track. Her new business ventures were ready to launch, and the once impossible had now become reality. She wasn't just a player in the game, she was the game. As the hours passed, Jasmine couldn't shake the image of Brooke's face when she had walked away from the airport. The fear, the disbelief. It had been a sight to behold. Jasmine had seen her type before. People like Brooke relied on their connections, their wealth, their status. But Jasmine had one thing that Brooke could never buy, the ability to remain calm under pressure. Jasmine knew the rules of the game. She had learned them the hard way. And now, as the pieces of her plan fell into place, she understood something Brooke never would. It wasn't about wealth or status. It was about control. As the day wore on, Jasmine found herself reviewing the documents once more, making sure everything was in order. But there was something else on her mind. Something that had been growing since the moment she had first crossed paths with Brooke. The thrill of victory was sweet, but it was the aftermath that intrigued her most. She knew that Brooke would not take this loss quietly. Brooke would try to fight back, try to reclaim her power. But Jasmine was prepared. The legal teams were ready, the documents were signed, and Jasmine had the connections to ensure that any attempt to undermine her would be crushed before it even had a chance to grow. As the evening approached, Jasmine's phone buzzed again. It was a message from her assistant. Brooke is making moves. She's contacting all the right people. Jasmine's lips curled into a small smile. She had been expecting this. She knew that Brooke wouldn't just sit back and let things slide. But what Brooke didn't know was that Jasmine had already anticipated her every move. "Let her try," Jasmine replied, tapping the screen. The game was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. Brooke's desperation was palpable, and Jasmine would be there to watch it all unfold. There was no turning back now. Jasmine's empire was growing, and she wasn't going to let anyone stand in her way. As the night fell, Jasmine leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed on the city lights below. She had come this far, and there was no stopping her now. Jasmine sat in her office, her mind swirling with the events of the past few days. The power she had been working toward for so long was finally hers. She felt the weight of it, the responsibility that came with it, but there was a certain thrill in knowing she had outsmarted everyone who thought they could stand in her way. The phone buzzed again, another message from her assistant. Brooke is escalating. She's called in her best lawyers and is trying to rally support from her business partners. Jasmine smiled. Small, knowing smile. She had expected nothing less. Brooke was not one to accept defeat gracefully. She would fight, and she would fight hard. But Jasmine knew something Brooke didn't. She was already too far behind. Jasmine had anticipated every move, every step. She had been preparing for this moment for years, and now it was time to watch the pieces fall into place. The sound of her phone ringing brought her back to reality. It was a call from one of her top legal advisors. "Jasmine, we've reviewed everything. Brooke's efforts are futile. Her team doesn't have the leverage they think they do. We can move forward with the next phase." Jasmine leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for. Brooke could call her lawyers. She could rally her partners, but it wouldn't matter. Jasmine had already set the wheels in motion. The deal was secured, and now, all she had to do was wait for Brooke to realize it was over. As she ended the call, a sense of calm washed over her. She had outplayed them all, and now the next phase of her empire would begin. But as she looked out over the city, a small part of her couldn't help but wonder if she was ready for the consequences of what she had done. Power came with its own set of challenges. The game was changing, and Jasmine was in the lead, but Brooke's desperation could create unpredictable problems. It was a dangerous game, one that required a steady hand and a sharp mind. Jasmine knew that if she faltered, even for a moment, everything she had worked for could slip away. The night stretched on, and Jasmine spent the rest of the evening reviewing her plans, fine-tuning the details of her next move. She had already reached out to several of her business contacts, securing additional support that would make it impossible for Brooke to regain any ground. But even as she made her preparations, a part of her knew that this victory wouldn't come without its own price. There would be a reckoning, and Jasmine would need to be ready. As the clock struck midnight, Jasmine finally allowed herself to relax, if only for a moment. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a news alert. The headline read, "Brooke Whitmore's $500 million. Deal in jeopardy after sudden termination." Jasmine couldn't help but smile as she read the article. It was happening. Brooke's empire was crumbling, just as she had predicted. She was no longer just a part of the game. She was the game. The pieces were falling into place, and soon, Jasmine would be the one calling the shots. Jasmine stood in front of her desk, reviewing the contracts once more, her mind sharp as ever. The hours spent preparing for this moment had paid off, but the job wasn't done. Brooke's desperation had only just begun, and Jasmine was well aware that she needed to be cautious. Her victory felt close, but in the world she operated in, nothing was guaranteed until it was sealed. Brooke's legal team was digging deep, looking for cracks in the foundation Jasmine had carefully built. But Jasmine wasn't worried. She had already prepared for this. She had outmaneuvered them before, and she would do it again. The phone buzzed, pulling her attention away from the documents in front of her. It was an email notification. Jasmine opened it, her eyes scanning the subject line. Brooke Whitmore's team requests mediation. A smirk played at the corner of her lips. So it had begun. She had expected this, of course. Brooke, unable to admit defeat, would attempt to negotiate her way out of the mess she had created. Jasmine's fingers danced over the keyboard as she quickly typed a response, declining mediation, and instead suggesting a final resolution through legal means. There would be no middle ground with someone like Brooke. The game was already over. As she sent the email, Jasmine allowed herself a moment to take a breath. She was in control, but the weight of the power she had gained was beginning to feel real. The notifications kept coming, one after another, each confirming what she already knew. The walls were closing in on Brooke. Contracts were being rescinded, partners were pulling away, and the foundation of her empire was crumbling piece by piece. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a rare moment of satisfaction. Brooke had made the mistake of underestimating her, and now she would pay the price. But Jasmine wasn't done. There were still strategic moves to be made, steps to solidify her place at the top. As she prepared for the next phase, Jasmine knew one thing for certain. This victory would resonate far beyond her dealings with Brooke. The industry was watching, and they would all soon learn the true extent of Jasmine's influence. But there was no rush. She didn't need to flaunt her power. It was enough for her to know that she had achieved what no one thought was possible. Brooke's empire was falling apart, and Jasmine's was rising in its place. It was a quiet shift, but it was powerful. Jasmine stood up, walking over to the window, looking out over the city once again. The night had fallen, but she was far from done. This was only the beginning. She had proven herself, but she knew there was always more to do, more to build. The battle with Brooke had been a stepping stone, and now the real work began. But for now, Jasmine allowed herself a moment of quiet victory, knowing full well that tomorrow would bring new challenges. And she would be ready. Jasmine sat at her desk, her hands steepled in front of her as she stared at the screen, the weight of the past weeks settling into her bones. The final email had come through. Brooke's company was officially losing its key investors. The multi-million-dollar deals she had worked so hard to maintain were crumbling like dust in the wind. Jasmine didn't need to read it twice to know that Brooke's empire was falling apart, and she had been the one to bring it down. Her own empire, though, was rising. The contracts, the partnerships, everything was coming together just as she had planned. The excitement she had felt before was now replaced by a sense of calm determination. This was her moment, and she knew it. But what truly gave her satisfaction wasn't just the victory over Brooke. It was the fact that she had built this from the ground up. Brooke had relied on her wealth, her connections, and her status. Jasmine, on the other hand, had built her strength through careful planning, strategy, and an unwavering belief in her own power. And now she stood on top. But she wasn't one to gloat. She understood that power was fleeting, and success came with its own set of challenges. As the clock ticked toward midnight, Jasmine began to prepare for her next move. There was still more to accomplish, more to secure, but the foundation had been laid. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts, and her assistant stepped in, holding a tablet. "Jasmine, the press release is ready. The public fallout is beginning." Jasmine nodded and motioned for her to proceed. The assistant handed her the tablet, and Jasmine quickly scanned through the document. It was a carefully crafted statement, diplomatic yet firm. It was time to show the world who Jasmine truly was. Her position was no longer just a question of business. It was a statement of power, influence, and control. The world would soon know that Jasmine had not only taken over where others had failed, but had also proven that she could thrive in a system designed to keep people like her out. As she signed the document, the weight of her decision was heavy but satisfying. She wasn't just winning against Brooke. She was winning for herself, for everyone who had ever been underestimated. The world was shifting, and Jasmine had just become one of its most formidable players. As the night drew on, Jasmine closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair, looking out over the city. She had done it. She had proven herself, and now she would show everyone what she was capable of. But she knew better than to rest on her laurels. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and Jasmine was ready for all of it. The game was far from over, and she was just getting started.